Have you ever looked at your product roadmap and felt like you're just building a slightly better version of what you built last year? It's a super common trap, and it has a name: the tyranny of the past. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what that is, and more importantly, how you, as a leader, can help your team finally break free from it. All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll nail down what this tyranny of the past really is. Then, we'll look at the two different paths you can take to build the future, and we'll use the Tesla story to make it real. After that, we'll jump into a practical 10-by playbook you can use, and we'll wrap it all up with your specific job as a leader in making this shift happen. Okay, let's dive right in. Section 1, the tyranny of the past. What exactly is this invisible force that keeps even the sharpest teams from doing truly groundbreaking work? I love this quote from Steve Chandler because it just hits the nail on the head. It's this idea that, without even realizing it, we see the future through the lens of what we've already experienced. So the best we can come up with is, well, just a shinier version of what already exists. And here's the key thing to get. This isn't a failure of imagination. It's not that your team isn't creative. It's our brain's default setting. We just naturally take what's in front of us today and stretch it into tomorrow. We extrapolate. And that tendency, that path of just making things a little bit better, is the #1 killer of breakthrough ideas. You've all heard this one, right? The famous faster horse problem? It's the perfect illustration. Back in 1900, if you'd asked anybody how to get around better, they wouldn't have described a car. They would have asked for a horse that's, a bit faster. Real invention, the big leaps, that requires you to see past the current solution entirely. So that brings us to section 2, two paths to the future. Because once you understand the difference between a faster horse and a car, you unlock this really powerful framework. It turns out there are really only two ways to think about building for tomorrow. And the difference, it really just boils down to the question you start with. The path of extrapolation asks, how can we make this thing 10% better? It's all about optimizing what you already have. But the path of first principles asks a totally different question. What is the absolute best way to solve this problem, starting from scratch? That one little shift in the question, well, it changes everything. So if you take that first path, you get put on a very predictable S-curve. You see these nice, steady gains. It feels safe. It feels like progress. But here's the catch. Eventually, you slam into the natural limits of that system, and your growth just flatlines. This is the comfortable but really dangerous path that most incumbents live on. But that second path, the path of first principles, it doesn't just nudge the old curve up a little bit. It jumps to a completely new S-curve, a whole new paradigm. It's the kind of leap that makes the old way of doing things look totally obsolete. This is the path of the disruptor. Okay, section 3. This is where it gets fun. Let's see what this looks like in the real world. And honestly, there is no better case study for this than the story of Tesla. I mean, just look at the difference in the questions they were asking. The big incumbent automakers were totally trapped by their own history. Their guiding question was always, how can we make our gasoline engines a little better? But Tesla's founders? They weren't car guys, they were tech guys. They asked, forget engines. What is the most efficient way to move a vehicle, period? They weren't looking at the past of the auto industry, they were looking at the past of laptop batteries. And get this, the big car companies had already proven to themselves that electric cars were a total dead end, but their proof was based on old, clunky, lead-acid battery technology. They were literally trapped by their own outdated data and their own history. The startup, on the other hand, had this amazing advantage of being an outsider. They didn't know what was supposedly impossible. What they did see was that the tiny lithium-ion cells in laptops were getting better and cheaper at an exponential rate, just like computer chips. They were thinking from the first principles of physics and chemistry, not the history of Detroit. And that right there is the punchline. While the establishment was busy polishing and perfecting the past, Tesla was off in a garage building a future that the auto industry couldn't even imagine. They escaped the tyranny of the past simply by asking a better question. All right, on to section 4, the 10x playbook. So this all sounds great, but how do you actually start applying this thinking to your own work? Let's get into some concrete, actionable steps. Here's a really simple rule of thumb I want you to remember. A 10 times 1% improvement, that comes from tweaking what you've already got. That's extrapolation. But a 10 times improvement, that almost always forces you to go all the way back to the beginning, to first principles, and rethink the entire problem from the ground up. So your number one tool here is the Socratic why. It's so simple. You start with a problem statement. Say, we need a faster horse. Then you just ask, why? Well, to get from A to B faster. Okay, why do we need to do that? To transport goods and people. You keep asking why until you get to the fundamental truth. That's how you get from a faster horse to inventing the car. Okay, beyond just asking why, here are a few other things you can do. First, get your team in a room and literally write down all of your past-based assumptions. Make the invisible visible. Second, look outside your own industry. How do logistics companies solve routing problems? How do video games solve engagement? And third, if you're in a big company, this is huge. Create a clean slate team, totally separate from the main business, and just let them build from scratch. All right, final section, your mandate as a leader. So what's your specific role in all of this? Because at the end of the day, you are the architect of how your team thinks. I want you to start thinking of yourself as the chief why officer. Seriously, in any strategy meeting, your most critical job isn't to have the answers. It's to ask the questions that force everyone else to go deeper. You have to be the one who gently but relentlessly pushes the team back to the fundamentals. You have to create a culture where it is safe and even encouraged to question everything. I call it intelligent heresy. When someone on your team stands up and challenges a sacred cow, one of those we've always done it this way things, you need to publicly celebrate them for it. Even if they're wrong, the message you're sending is that the past is not sacred here. Now, this one might be a little controversial, but be really careful with the word experience when you're hiring. So often, it's just code for being an expert in an old way of doing things. Instead, you need to hire for learnability, people who have a proven track record of picking up new skills and adapting to completely new paradigms. That's the real superpower. And let me leave you with this final, critical wording. Your current success, your cash cow product, that is your single biggest threat. The very assumptions that made you successful are the same ones creating the massive blind spots where your next competitor is going to emerge. You have to be willing to question the very things that got you here. So I'll leave you with this one question to take back to your team. The next time you're looking at your roadmap or kicking off a new project, I want you to ask this. Be really honest with yourself. Are we just building a faster horse, or are we actually trying to invent the car?